When military analysts discuss the Iran-Iraq war, the focus usually lands on the grotesque human wave assaults, the trench warfare, and, the chemical weapons. The narrative is simple: Iran traded bodies for bullets. But that surface-level reading, well, it misses the real story. It misses the moment a desperate, isolated regime, watching its American-made Air Force rot on the tarmac and its armored divisions bleed out, made a calculated decision. They realized they couldn't win a conventional war against Iraq or its backers, so they stopped trying to fight the last war and started designing the next one. What emerged from the rubble of places like Khorramshahr wasn't just a military doctrine. It was a blueprint for survival against a technologically superior enemy. It's a playbook that has since been exported from Lebanon to Ukraine, and it reveals the hard truth about how the weak can dictate terms to the strong. To understand the strategic mind of Iran today, you have to look past the rhetoric and look at the tactical play they've been running for 40 years. By 1982, after pushing Saddam Hussein's army back across the border, Iran faced a strategic dilemma. The leadership in Tehran had to decide whether to accept a negotiated peace or push into Iraq to overthrow the Ba'athist regime. They chose the latter, but they had a fundamental problem. The Egyptian Field Marshal Abu Ghazala, in his detailed analysis of the war, noted that the Iraqis initially failed to concentrate their forces and had no concept of maneuver warfare. But by 1984, the shoe was on the other foot. Iran's regular army, the Artesh, had been decimated by post-revolution purges and years of combat. They couldn't replace their tanks or aircraft thanks to a total US arms embargo. They were flying with fewer than 80 operational fighter jets against Iraq's hundreds. They were outgunned, out-armored, and out-teched. So they did something unconventional. They institutionalized the zeal. They formalized the Basij and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, not just as ideological enforcers, but as the primary maneuver elements. This wasn't just fanaticism, it was a tactical acknowledgement that manpower was their only abundant resource. But the real shift, the one that defines their strategy today, was realizing they couldn't just attack the Iraqi army. They had to attack the will of the nation supporting Iraq. Unable to break the Iraqi defensive lines around Basra, Iran began looking for pressure points. They found them in the economic lifelines of the Gulf states. This became the tanker war of the mid-1980s. Iran understood that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait were financing Saddam's war machine. Directly invading Kuwait was impossible, but making their oil exports a liability was not. Using mines, small fast boats, and silkworm missiles, Iran demonstrated that it could disrupt the flow of oil from the region. This was the birth of their asymmetric naval doctrine. They didn't need a navy to defeat the US Navy in a stand-up fight. They just needed to make the cost of safe passage so high that insurance rates would skyrocket and global pressure would mount. When the United States reflagged Kuwaiti tankers and entered the conflict directly in 1987, it validated the Iranian theory. By provoking a response from the world's only superpower, Tehran successfully internationalized the conflict and painted the Gulf Arabs as dependents of the West. They lost the tactical engagements like Operation Praying Mantis, but, they won the strategic point. They had expanded the war horizontally, tying Iraq's survival to the security of the global energy market. This wasn't just fighting, it was leveraging. So this brings us to the modern interpretation of that play. After the war, Iran codified these lessons into what is now known as the forward defense doctrine. The goal, basically, is to deter an attack on Iranian soil. By holding the assets of potential aggressors at risk anywhere in the region, the Iraq War proved they couldn't build a blue water navy or an air force capable of challenging the US in the open ocean. So instead, they invested in what they could: ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. Now look at the math. An Iranian Shahed 136 drone costs about $20,000 to produce. The Patriot missile used to shoot it down costs $3 million. This is the tanker war logic applied to modern air defense. They don't need to penetrate Israeli or American airspace with stealth fighters. They just need to force the enemy to spend millions to defend against thousands of cheap munitions. It's really an economic war of attrition fought with missiles instead of soldiers. But the tactical play goes deeper than just cost. It's about the operational art they lacked in the 80s, and the IRGC studied how their small victories, and I mean like using sea killers to hit tankers or the coordinated mining operations, had outsized political effects. They realized that if you synchronize these asymmetric tools, you can create a deterrence bubble. The 2019 attack on the Abqaiq oil facility in Saudi Arabia is a textbook example of this evolved doctrine. Instead of a declaration of war, Iran used a handful of cruise missiles and drones to temporarily halve Saudi oil production. They didn't seize territory. They targeted the economic stability of their rival. The message was clear. We can reach your critical infrastructure with precision, and your expensive American air defense systems have gaps. And now this playbook is being stress-tested in Ukraine. Russia, facing its own attritional nightmare, turned to Iran for those same Shahed drones. For Tehran, this isn't just an arms sale. It's a live-fire test of their tactical concepts against a modern, integrated, NATO-style air defense network. The data they are gathering on how to saturate, deceive, and overwhelm those defenses is invaluable. It completes a feedback loop that started in the marshes of southern Iraq. Find a low-cost solution, test it in a high-threat environment, refine it, and then proliferate it to allies and proxies. Recently, Iranian commanders have spoken about passive defense as a strategic necessity following their 12-day war with Israel. This isn't about building bunkers. It's about systemic resilience. It's the acknowledgement that their infrastructure, cyber, nuclear energy, will be targeted. The lesson from 40 years of isolation is that you cannot prevent the attack. You can only ensure the system survives it. For the survivalist and the historian, Iran's journey offers a crucial lesson. When you strip away the ideology, what remains is a brutally pragmatic approach to warfare. They understood that against a superior force, you don't meet them on the battlefield they choose. You define the battlefield by your enemy's vulnerabilities. You prioritize sustainability over lethality. And you accept that wars are won not by occupying land, but by outlasting the opponent's political will to fight. The Iran-Iraq War was a near-death experience for the Islamic Republic, but from that crucible, they forged a tactical identity that has turned them into one of the most influential and disruptive military thinkers of the 21st century. If you value this kind of deep dive analysis, if you want to understand the strategy behind the headlines, then subscribe to Warmer China. Hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to see the full picture. We don't do surface level here, we study the game so you know how it's really played